Southwest has one of the most unique corporate cultures of any business in history. Could you guys talk a little bit about the development of that culture?
Our corporate culture really is, I think, the number one reason behind our success. We start out at the very applicant stage, and we never change, even when people retire, as I now have, in saying that we are in the customer service business. We happen to provide airline transportation. And when your entire focus is on proactive customer service delivery, and when your approach is that you deliver the same kind of customer service internally as you deliver externally, it makes life a whole lot simpler. So everything that we do at Southwest is a way of life versus a program or a new policy or a new procedure or anything that goes along with that. And you've seen probably just being out in our lobby that our mission statement is posted about every 3 feet in every location that we have. But even if you walked up to an employee and they couldn't give you a verbatim quote of what our mission statement is, they would tell you at the very least that they are expected every minute of every day to display 3 attributes and to basically follow the golden rule every day. The golden rule being treat others the way you would like to be treated. And if you just get simplistic about it and go back to that, life is really pretty simple. So our culture is certainly made up of lots of things, but the 3 attributes that we ask our employees to share every day, first with each other and then with the rest of the world, is a warrior spirit, a servant's heart, and believe it or not, in corporate America, a fun-loving, L-U-V, L-U-V is our stock symbol, fun-loving attitude. And it is truly amazing if you just go back to those 3 attributes. You know just about everything there is about Southwest Airlines to know.
My definition of strategy was always very simple, and that was low fares and high spirits. And if you got those 2, I think it'll carry you a long, long way.
What would ever cause you to believe that you'd be successful organizing a company on those principles? I mean,
nothing. But we saw all the other airlines that were organized on different principles, and they had been coddled and protected by the federal government for 40 years. And during that time, they had gone somewhat lazy and inefficient. And basically what we said to ourselves was, we want to do everything differently from the way the traditional legacy airlines do it. And part of that was having a very different culture at Southwest Airlines, because they walked around looking like monks that had just been punished for their indiscretions in their monasteries. And we thought that most people like to have a good time, like to have some fun, like to enjoy what they do. And the task that we set for our people was, when our customers got off the airplane at their destinations, we didn't want them to say, we made another one. We wanted to say, you know, that was a very entertaining, very lively experience, and something they would talk about with their families and their friends thereafter. And a large part of it is what Colleen said, and that you start internally. We turned the business world kind of upside down in terms of its traditional thinking, because the big conundrum at the business schools going way back, Tom, was who comes first? You know, your employees, your customers, or your shareholders. And they thought that was the real mystery of the ages. And I kind of astounded them when I said, your employees come first. And they'll treat the customers well if they know that you care for them, you're going to take care of them, you're going to protect them, and the customers will come back, and that makes your shareholders happy. And that established kind of a new mechanism for looking at business. And we have always treated our employees as individuals, and not just as automatons in a machine coming to work as cogs. We don't want them to wear masks at work. We want them to be themselves and act like themselves. And that's one of the things they enjoy at Southwest Airlines, because they can be natural. Years ago, a ramp agent wrote me, Gary, and he said, Herb, I'm on to your secret. And I've never said this before publicly. He said, you're making work fun and home work. And I think you can imagine why I didn't ever say that publicly. I thought I might sustain a little obloquy as a result of it. But every grief that our employees experience, we share with them. Every joy that they have, we share with them, and we recognize it. So they know, hey, Southwest Airlines appreciates me for who I am, not just for what I do. And that establishes a very different type of company that most people are used to. And it's funny because we get a lot of younger people coming here, as you might expect, and they've never had a real job before. They really haven't. I mean, they might have cut lawns or, worked in a convenience store or something of that nature, but they've never had an organizational type job. And they run into things, show up on time, and, or let us know when you're not coming. And it's unusual to them to have that stringent discipline. And they will say, and I've had this happen over and over again, well, this is just terrible. Southwest Airlines isn't what I envisioned it to be. I mean, they're actually demanding that I do things in addition to party. And that can get to be a very heavy burden when you're very young. But they leave and they go to some other company, and this is my point. Man, they want to get back as fast as they can. They reapply within a very short period of time because they finally found out what it's really like in most workplaces compared to Southwest Airlines. And that's, I think, one of the best tributes that we can have is from those people that go someplace else and say, this is hell on earth. I want to get back to Southwest Airlines. And one of the things we've always asked them to do, and they've been willing to do because of our concern and care for them, which is manifested in every aspect of their lives, they're willing to be more productive. They're willing to work harder. They're dedicated to the cause. It really is a cause at Southwest Airlines. It's not just a mechanical thing for them. It's something that enlists their hearts in what they're doing. And that's what a symbol of freedom, our signature line for a long time, was intended to signify. You're not just answering the telephone. You're not just throwing bags. You're giving the American people the freedom to fly, which they haven't had before Southwest Airlines. When I started working on Southwest Airlines back in 1966, I was 11. I had a vision. Only about 15 to 18% of the adults in America had ever flown on a single commercial flight. Can you imagine? The idea was that only very wealthy people or business people flying on, their company's check would ever fly or want to fly. Well, of course, everybody in America wanted to fly. If you were going from the Rio Grande Valley to MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, you'd prefer to fly for 45 minutes than be thrown in the back of a station wagon on a mattress and take 6 hours to get there, and it would cost you more in order to accomplish that. And one of the things that we emphasized was that we just weren't reducing costs for business. We were enabling people to do the things they wanted to do in their personal lives. The divorced fathers that would write and say, if it weren't for Southwest Airlines, I wouldn't be able to keep up with my kids because your fares are so low that we can have more frequent visits. The grandmother who wrote and said, I'm going to San Diego to see my grandson graduate from San Diego Naval Training School, and I would not have been able to afford to go if it weren't for Southwest Airlines. So what I'm saying is it's a great social contribution. It really represents doing well by doing good for others. And that's one of the reasons it's been very successful, because our people, most of them feel that they're following sort of a loftier job, that their reach is being extended by Southwest Airlines. I would say to them, when you're talking to your grandchildren, I want you to be able to tell your grandchildren that Southwest Airlines, being at Southwest Airlines, gave you more pride than most things that you've done in your life. It extended your reach. It made you a different person and a better person as a consequence of it. And that's part of the culture that Colleen was talking about previously. Now, we would have corporate days at Southwest Airlines, as Gary well remembers, when we'd have 160 companies come in from around the world. And they wanted to know how we hired, how we trained, how we created esprit de corps and maintained it. And we soon discovered that most of them, not all of them, but most of them were looking for some little easy formula, like E equals MC squared, and something you could put on the blackboard and go back to your company and say, I've got the magic formula. They didn't realize that while it's simple on the surface, as expressed by Colleen, basically the golden rule, that the execution of it requires a monstrous amount of attention and time. And frankly, they weren't willing to invest that attention and time. And I'll never forget, because I laughed so heartily, we had one of those corporate days, and there was a fellow with a airline from Europe, and I don't think he exactly got the thrust of what we were trying to tell them, because when they all came in from companies in South America, Asia, Europe, you name it, our people made them all do the Macarena. So they interviewed this guy at the end of this course for other companies, and they said, what did you get out of this? He said, when I get back to my airline, I'm going to make them all do the Macarena. And we said, evidently, the basic message did not quite get through. And so we finally discontinued that, and the reason we discontinued is that, you know, that's sort of a badge for a company, that's sort of an emblem of your excellence in dealing with your people. But Colleen Barrett is so attentive to the well-being of our own people, she finally concluded that we were spending more time getting ready to hopefully teach and train outsiders and detracting from the attention that we should spend on our own people, and so we canceled it. And she's done many other things like that because she never loses focus on the fact that our people are number one, and that we are going to honor them and cherish them and grieve with them and rejoice with them. And so that's the kind of thing I think that makes a culture, number one, valuing the individual. That's the kind of thing that breeds passion for what you do. And the third thing is that a lot of people from outside don't understand that it can't be programmatic. It has to come from the heart, not the head. If people think you're doing this for 6 months just to put on a show, they'll know instantaneously that you're not real and you don't mean it. And it was kind of interesting. Someone in a certain city asked me to come talk to him about the fact that his company, which was a family company, it was owned by a family, he was a third generation, was less family-oriented than Southwest Airlines. So I went to the reception room, and he met me, and he took me up to my to his office, on the 8th floor. And on the way up in the elevator, the elevator kept stopping, and employees of the company would get on, and he wouldn't even acknowledge their physical presence. Now, an elevator is pretty small. It's hard to ignore somebody in an elevator. I mean, that's got to be a policy of yours, if you can ignore somebody in an elevator. So we got to his office, and he said, well, where do you think we ought to start? And I said, I got a little starter for you. Say hello to your people. Say, I heard you had a baby. How's the baby doing? You feeling okay? I said, just start there, and we'll work up. But in a very fundamental way, that's really what it's about, just being interested in and loving people.
It's hard to follow Herb, as you all know. And so, but just a couple quick points. I think, number one, the board gets it from the board's perspective. The board does get it. The board understands. We've all been beat around the head by Colleen and Herb over many years, and Gary gets it. So I remember talking with Herb 10 years ago when I joined the board, and we had a drink. I know that's hard to believe. I had to work Herb into it, but somehow he was willing to do it.
It was a Sprite.
But what we talked about, and even what I understood going back 10 years as a very novice director, was the hard part is going to be the transition when Colleen and Herb step out and a new generation steps in. Well, the good news is it wasn't just Colleen and Herb. It was the entire organization who understood the culture, and Gary leads that into this next generation of leaders within Southwest. I would also add, though, you can't emphasize the people enough. You must realize that Southwest is the most heavily unionized of all airlines, and maybe not the most today, but it's always the most or the second most heavily unionized. And you say that to people, and they just are breathtaking. They just can't understand how that could possibly work. Well, the truth of the matter is, when you respect employees, just one more term to add, respect employees, they respect you. We've also avoided stupid, okay? And that's a good thing to avoid. While our competitors were out, without naming names of other airlines in Dallas, when they were out having huge compensation programs for their executives, or even worse, basically hiding those programs that if we went bankrupt, we would still have this program off book, so to speak.
Yeah.
Remember that? And when that, of course, hit, that just shook everybody at American. We did mention the word, but it's a country as well, I guess, so you can also mention that.
Yeah. Gary did not mention any other airline. I did not mention any other airline, nor did Colleen or Tom. Remember, it was Bill Cunningham.
Right. And it's a fine airline, and I'll just stop here because I will get sarcastic. But my point is, we did avoid those kind of things, and our employees know we really do care about them, and they are the most important. So that just exists throughout the organization, and unless you understand that, you will not understand Southwest Airlines, and the board gets it.
And I'll tell you who else got it. Bob Crandall. Because when there was a big takeover craze in the 1980s, excuse me, that's allergies, not smoking. When it's a big takeover craze in the 1980s, Bob Crandall, then the CEO of American, you're going to think I'm lying because I'm coughing, but Bob Crandall said anybody that tried to take over Southwest Airlines would wind up with ashes in their hands because they would destroy the culture in the very process of accomplishing the merger. And that was from Bob.
Yeah,
I mean,
I know
he
that.
recognized that.
He understood that. And you can see the culture that exists at some other places where, and it's not just American, it's many airlines, there's just almost active warfare between the employees and management. And we have just when Herb Kelleher stepped down, the pilots, Southwest Airlines Pilot Association ran an ad across the United States saying, Herb, thank you for what you've done. That just couldn't happen anywhere else. And Gary has a great relationship with, because he understands that. You see Gary up with the pilots, you see Gary handing out the peanuts, you see Gary he gets it, and the board gets it. So, but we don't have a culture committee. We have culture committee within the company, but the board doesn't, but we get it at all places.
You know, I was going to add to the, not to the Crandall story, but to the Crandall thought, for the very same reason that we didn't worry about mergers or acquisitions because we knew that the Southwest as we knew it couldn't exist if someone else came in. That's also the reason that Gary is the successor, because we could not, our employees wouldn't stand for it if we went outside Southwest Airlines and brought in, I don't care how good or how well known the person was or whatever, to be the head person at Southwest Airlines, they would fire him or her on the spot. And they feel very strongly about that. Years ago, we were maybe 10 years old at the time, I brought in a former flight attendant who was a motivational speaker. She was a former flight attendant from TWA. She was absolutely fantastic. And I brought her in to just talk to our flight attendants. They practically hung me by my toenails. I mean, how could you, and I didn't tell them she was, but in the course of her speech, she told them, and it was like, this is so insulting. You are bringing in someone from another airline to tell me how to do my job as a flight attendant. And I said, well, I'm sorry. You know, but my point really is that that was part of succession planning, of course, but the choice had to be a person that was already had his own respect, that already walked line in line. You know, we're not very much into structure. We have titles and we have an organizational chart and all because, you know, business schools told us we had to. I really got sick of telling people we didn't have one, and we finally drew one on a piece of paper. But the title, really, we have a very egalitarian spirit at Southwest. And everybody has job responsibilities, but every Southwest employee is expected to be a marketeer, a public relations person, a conflict resolution officer, and a servant leader. It goes back to the service part. Servant leader to me, whether you've read about it or know anything about it at all, there's all kinds of books being written about it today. But the only thing I think you need to know about servant leadership is that you serve first, you lead second. And you have to know when to follow versus when to lead. And I think that I am sitting up here with, I don't know the dean as well, but I know all the other gentlemen quite well. And I will tell you that any one of them can follow as well as lead when it's the right time to do so. And every one of them gets servant leadership. And our people know it. If you put a fraud in any position, they will call them on it in a split second, and they won't allow it. So, it's a wonderful thing, I think, that you can have, I can't say 3 generations, but I'll say 2 anyway, and I won't tell you which one I fall into. But you can have 3 generations that really have 3 different disciplines in terms of their background and their experience, and but they all share the same passion for people and the same passion for customer service. It's pretty awesome.
When 9/11 took place, we had a board meeting. Remember, Herb? And we had a board meeting when 9/11 took place, and we were all scattered across the country. I was in Boston, and we had 2 within days, literally. And Herb went through some of the things that the company was going to have to do. Of course, no employees took a pay cut. That didn't happen. But some management took a pay cut. The board's reaction to that was, we want to go off pay, not a pay cut. Board takes no pay until we get this resolved. And it wasn't a big deal for us, certainly financially, but it was a statement. And it was a statement that at the very beginning of the company, the top of the company, we wanted to sacrifice the most.
That's right.
And that means a lot to the people on the line. At least we hoped it did.
It does.
You know, I think there are some students in the room, at least there's some awfully young-looking faces in the room, and one of the most significant lessons to me with 9/11 was, and I've told this story many times to people even at Southwest. We got the first phone call. We don't really know yet quite what has happened. And within 10 minutes of the first phone call, we had our crisis committee in the boardroom. We stayed there for 72 hours straight. But this is what I remember the most. And by the way, this was, 9/11 on June, 18, I guess, of 2001. Herb stepped down from 2 of his 3 titles. So this is like, oh my. And so I basically had that position at the time, and so the president's position. And I walked into that boardroom, and Herb and Gary came from different directions. I remember this as though it was yesterday. And they both had the same list of what needed to be done instantly. And I think Herb had done it driving in his car, and I think Gary had done it in his shower. I don't know. But but they had no discussion with each other. It was so impressive to me. Finances are not particularly my thing, and I've never wanted them to be, and I don't profess that I'm an expert at it. But they had a list, I think it was 12 items, and it was almost, maybe not number for number, but it was the exact same list. And that, I think at that point, I knew how serious it was, but I was overwhelmed with that. And then for the next 3 days, we didn't go home. I mean, it was unbelievable. And for the students, we've got a great video if you want to take it for your classes. We decided that we wanted to, share the learnings that we had, and we ended up with so much video that we had just people talking, no scripts, just from the heart, that we broke it down to 4 15-minute videos each on different aspects of it, and it is awesome.
By the way, when Gary found out that he had the same list with the same items on it that I had, he said, "Herb, I feel mentally deficient."